Hi, welcome back to Kingdom Portions here in Kingdom of Context. Guys, this week it's fascinating. We're going to get to see Pharaoh actually lets the children of Israel go from Egypt. We're going to get some unique information about the angel of the Lord that led the Israelites out of Egypt. We also see a very interesting hint at how in Exodus 15, Moses is speaking about the sanctuary of God, which he's not even shown until 10 chapters later. So how did he know? We're also going to be discussing a very controversial topic about cooking on the Sabbath, as it is explained in Exodus 16. So it's a fascinating episode. Thank you for joining us. Stick with us. Hi, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome back to Kingdom Portions here on Kingdom in Context. I'm Sean Griffin, and I'm accompanied by my incredible and lovely wife.
Hey guys, I'm Lindsay. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, sweetie.
Shabbat Shalom, babe.
Thank you for joining us again, folks. This week we're going to be going through Exodus chapter 13, verse 17, all the way through the end of chapter 17. And it's a fascinating episode, babe. I'm excited about this one. Not just because everyone's always asking about the angel of the Lord, but because as many who've been following Kingdom in Context know that everything that we do here is to point to the gospel of the kingdom of God. A part of that, some of the component pieces of the gospel of the kingdom of God, is all throughout Scripture the idea of God's heavenly sanctuary. What that is, what that's about, why Jesus, our high priest right now, is in that place doing his priestly duties before the Father, mediating for us. So it's an exciting concept to see Moses actually talking about it as if he knows what it is. Right? So, and making a song after the Red Sea event, he's making a song with mentions of it in there. So we're going to get to that, and I'm excited about it. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and we appreciate you spending your time with us on Shabbat to do this. And as always, in the links down below in the video description, there's both Patreon, PayPal, and even a P.O. box. If anything that is done through this ministry is blessing you and you want to bless us, those are ways to do it. And we always stress to folks that we're not Levites. This is not a tithe. So all this concept is off Matthew 10 and 2 Corinthians 9 and Deuteronomy 24. This whole concept that Yeshua sent out his disciples to preach the gospel of the kingdom of God, which is something that we do here on this channel emphatically. And the idea was he told them not to take any money with them because if their message blessed people, basically those people would bless them out of their generosity and hospitality. So that's the only principle we stand on, and we thank you for prayerfully considering that. But other than that, sweetie, I'm excited to get to it.
Me too.
Are you? Okay.
Yes.
We'll start reading, guys. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 13, and we'll start with verse 17.
All right. Now when Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was near, for God said, the people might change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Hence God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea, and the sons of Israel went up in martial array from the land of Egypt. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones from here with you. Then they set out from Succoth and camped in Etham on the edge of the wilderness. The Lord was going before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them on the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people.
Well, thank you, sweetie.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so first thing that sticks out, 17, right? This idea that they're not being led by the sea, which is the Mediterranean Sea, because we know they crossed the Red Sea, which means they went a southern route. But instead of going northeast, they kind of just went directly east and went towards the Red Sea because he even tells us he doesn't want them to see war that was going on amongst the Philistine Empire. So a couple things for me, who love history. This tells me that all the way back during the days of the Exodus, the Philistine Empire was already established. So this was something that we don't see Israel interacting with on a large scale until we get into like the days of Samson, right? The book of Judges.
Right, and remind me again, the Philistines they weren't one group of people, They were a conglomeration.
Yeah, it was like five different nations that made up of the Philistine Empire.
Okay.
So this concept of empires has been around for a long time, guys. And this is why the Romans called themselves a Roman Empire, right? And they had an emperor, and they had other nations they governed, and within those other nations had their own kings, right, who governed the nation. They just were subservient to the Roman emperor who was over all these. And there's even a verse, I can't remember. It's man, it's slipping the top of my head. It's in the Wisdom of Solomon, but which is actually one of the pairings we're going to do later, guys. But there's even a verse in there where God is chastising wicked rulers because they boast about ruling many nations. So that's a common theme throughout history, and the military involvements of different countries throughout history is they would form empires. And so this is the first mention here of the Philistine Empire. Now, we saw in a couple weeks ago, as we were looking at some of the portions from Jubilees, how Pharaoh was already fighting with Assyria, right? Behind the scenes in the interim time between the days of Joseph and now this moment of the Exodus, those hundreds of years in between. There was already these fights and struggles going on between the nations in that region, and it's always been going on, is the sad part. So the father knew this. He didn't want them to be afraid. He didn't want to take them into an actual war zone. So he led them a kind of a more southern eastern route, and that's where they come up on the Red Sea, obviously. So what sticks out to you in this particular?
Well, it's interesting that it says that they were led out in martial array. So that's like, I mean, army get-ups, it sounds like.
Well, military formations.
Yeah, I mean, so it's just another reminder that they weren't, a small group of people with no ability to defend themselves. Right. And it does remind you, why Pharaoh would have some sort of valid reason to say at the beginning of the book, these people are going to grow large and they'll overcome us, or whatever he said. Yeah,
back in Exodus 1, right? He says the people are too numerous and more mighty than we are.
Right, which is the funny part, is that they themselves, the Israelites, don't seem to recognize this the whole time. That, clearly... this leader that's oppressing them is actually doing it because he fears their potential power against him.
That's right. Yeah, because they could defend themselves.
Yeah.
And there's even other apocryphal books that discuss how they were formed in each tribe in their military array, which is interesting. We don't see that in Jubilees or in Exodus or Genesis, but I wouldn't doubt it, because we do see that in the Book of Numbers,
right?
As they're kind of grouped off, if you will, into their own tribes. Anyway, it's fascinating because the people that had more numbers, the tribe that had more actual numbers of population, they were put strategically in certain places.
Right.
And that was the point of how they traveled. And this has been kind of if you don't know, guys, in Numbers chapter 2, people have actually plotted on paper the numbers, how they were arranged, and it forms a cross.
Awesome.
So they were traveling in military array with the foot of the cross going first. So this is what people have put together.
Interesting.
And that's how fascinating is that, right? Because, I mean, symbolically, it's very fun, because then you start remembering statements like, how Satan will be crushed by the heel of Messiah, right?
Yeah.
So just things like that. It's funny because what else do we see in reference in Ephesians chapter 6, right? Those whose feet are shod with the gospel of peace.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what I mentioned in the intro here, is how already Moses knew about the sanctuary in the heavenly tabernacle, which is part of the message of the gospel of the kingdom of God, which is the gospel of peace. Yeah. And so, because that is the moment where peace on earth will come, and we as resurrected saints will be at peace with God, because we will no longer transgress his law and therefore be able to live in his house with him. So that, there's all these symbolic things that completely line up with the gospel of the kingdom of God, both in verbal form and in bird's eye view, large, practical form, which is it's amazing. Father is just a masterful planner. Yeah. What else sticks out to you in this chapter?
Another thing I like is that they did not forget to bring the bones of Joseph with them. And I mean, it's been how many years, a few centuries since Joseph passed.
That's right.
And even though they have very clearly gone pretty far astray from the instructions, they need to have a whole review again when they get out of Egypt. But they remembered that promise that was made to him. And it's also interesting to notice that all the other patriarchs' bones had already been taken up and buried in the cave. I think it's the cave at Machpelah, opposite Mamre. That's always included in the statement. But all the patriarchs had already had their bones taken there, but Joseph's remained in Egypt. And we know how the Egyptians revere their dead. And we know Joseph was a highly respected and well-loved leader of the Egyptians at one point. So it's interesting that the children of Israel themselves allowed his bones to stay there while they took all the other ones,
That's
to
right.
be buried, because there was this mutual understanding that Joseph was very important to the Egyptian people for quite a long time, and it would be very important for them to have his bones in whatever special tomb they made for him and that kind of thing. So,
And this is actually why the father told both Joseph and Jacob the idea of, well, make sure to grab Joseph's bones when you guys leave, because you will leave eventually. You're going to, like, before he even, when Jacob was concerned about, I don't know, do I really need to go down to Egypt?
Right.
And he had the angel show up and actually do this because he was celebrating the Feast of First Fruits. That was the moment where he had to be assured, oh yeah, it's okay for you to go down to Egypt, but when you guys leave, make sure to bring Joseph's bones.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
it was like that. So even this was prophesied back to Abraham, was that they were going to go into Egypt, they were going to be oppressed over time, and then the Father was going to bring them out with a mighty hand.
Right.
So this whole concept, this is what we've become to talk about over the last 3 weeks, is from the beginning of Exodus chapter 1, we saw the mindset of the Hebrews themselves forgetting the ways of the Father, which consequently would mean they're forgetting the promises of the Father, which is fulfilled in all these prophetic statements about, well, here's what's going to happen to you. Because remember, in Jubilees chapter 32, we already saw Jacob was shown all the things that would befall him and his descendants throughout the ages, right? So just like Abraham was shown this idea, Jacob already knew they were going to go into Egypt, there were going to be a time where they would go into oppression, and then the Father was going to bring them out back into the land of Canaan with a mighty hand and judge the nation that was oppressing them. So we already had this stated to multiple people.
Yeah.
But over time, we see this in our own life, right?
Yes.
When you get caught up in the busyness or the oppression or the pain that other people are putting on you, you sometimes forget the good messages and the good words promised to you by the Father. So here comes Moses, not just representing the deliverance that was promised, but the message that and all the prophecy included about why they would even go into the promised land, why they would even be brought out. So he's coming in to get them to a place now where they're going to go to Sinai, and they're going to get, through Moses, through these next 38 to 40 years, they're going to get a remembrance, if you will, not just a renewal of the covenant that was with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as Deuteronomy 30:20 tells us, but also a renewal of all the prophecy involved of what that's going on. And that's why we're going to read in Exodus 15, Moses immediately starts speaking prophecy about the kingdom come. So anyway, I want to draw attention to that as we read these next few chapters, because I think it's really important for us to understand that concept.
Yeah. And before we move on, I just want to let people know this concept of Joseph possibly having a tomb in Egypt, that is something that's addressed in the documentary I'm always talking about. Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus. And you might be able to find little clips of this part of the documentary without having to rent the whole thing. Yeah. But they do think that they have found the tomb of Joseph and
not just his tomb, right? But even
an entire
brothers,
area,
right?
Yes, an entire area of property that most likely belonged to him, and a sarcophagus that resembles him. It has, features that are very clearly not Egyptian features, like red hair. So very fascinating for the people who, like us, are, nerds about the archaeology parts of these things. There probably is legitimately a tomb of Joseph that's been found, and the secular world just kind of ignores it. So I'll recommend that documentary one more time. I've only done it once so far when we've been in Exodus.
Yeah. And then lastly, before we move on to chapter 14, I just want to draw people's attention to the first place they go that tells us, what was it? Was it verse 18 or what was it? No, verse 20. It says, then they set out from Sukkot. So they went to Sukkot, right?
Yeah.
That was the first place they went.
Yeah.
Guys, the word Sukkot, right? This is a festival of the Lord, right? And the fall festival, what's also called the Feast of Tabernacles. It's the same word. And we saw that Jacob created this term and celebrated this because of where he went and built all these booths for him and his animals. Yeah. And they celebrated this festival 7 days with joy to the Lord. Now, granted, they're going to a town in the area of Egypt called Sukkot, right? But how interesting is that? Yeah. Foreshadowing prophetically, how interesting is the moment that they're coming out of Egypt, they go to a place called Booths, which is the festival. This is symbolic of us at the resurrection going straight to the barn, the New Jerusalem.
The big booth.
The big booth. Yeah, exactly. It's amazing. And I actually did, last year I actually did a breakdown on like all the different spots that they go to in their journey over the 40 years. And like the first 9 or 10, if you put the meanings of the Hebrew words all together, it's amazing. It creates like a sentence, and its relevance to the gospel of the kingdom of God. So if you ever wondered, well, why did God take them there? And then why did they take them there? And why did they stop here? And why does the text take the time to tell us they stopped here, but then moved on, right? Because the Father is layering into his word something prophetic about the gospel of the kingdom of God. It's amazing, guys. It's truly amazing. We just didn't have time to really elaborate this week on all that. I may do a special video at another point where I just focus just on their trips, on their journey. But we've got to move to 14. Yeah. So, can we read this one?
Yeah. And if you saw anything in that little half of a chapter, that you want to point out that you think is interesting, just drop it in the comments below. Yes,
please do. Let us know what you're thinking down below. All right, so we're going to be looking at chapter 14. It says, Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. You shall camp in front of Baal-zephon, opposite it, by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, They are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people. And they said, What is this that we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made his chariots ready and took his people with him. And he took 600 select chariots, and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers all over them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel as the sons of Israel were going out boldly. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen, and his army. They overtook them, camping by the sea, beside Pi-hahiroth, in front of Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh drew near, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they became very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you had taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way? Bring us out of Egypt. Why have you dealt with us this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, Do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. Then the Lord said to Moses, Why are you crying out to me? Then the Lord said to Moses, Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. As for you, lift up your staff and stretch your hand out over the sea and divide it. The sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they will go in after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, when I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and his horsemen. The angel of God, who had been going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was the cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Thus the one did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. The sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Then the Egyptians took up the pursuit, and all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen went in after them in the midst of the sea. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to swerve, and made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians said, Let us flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians. Then the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on the right hand and on the left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and his servant Moses. All right, guys. So apparently it still took all that for them to believe. But you know what? A little detail here that I think is fascinating, where it says the Lord caused their wheels and chariots to swerve. So imagine two banks of the seashore, the water's divided, the army and chariots are running through there, and they get to a certain point, but because the Lord causes their chariots to be difficult to drive, they say, oh my gosh, the Lord's fighting for them again, let's go back. So then they go back. So what I'm getting at is, not only did he make the waters crash in on them as they were fleeing, but apparently they were so far in that the time it took them to flee back really trapped them. Whereas it's possible they could have kept going forward and not all of them died. But in order to kill all of them, he did it's like two stages is what I'm saying, right? And this is something I never hear people talk about, is this idea that the first stage was he actually, I don't know if it was a wind or if it was literally just angels like knocking on the wheels of the chariots as they were driving by. I don't know how that works, but he made it very difficult for the chariot wheels to actually drive, and they were being to swerve to the point where the Egyptians actually vocalized, oh my gosh, the Lord's fighting for them.
Yeah.
And so then they try to flee, and as they're fleeing, that's when he really trapped them. So that's very unique, because we just have this picture of movies in our head, right?
Right.
Where they're running into the dry area and then the walls close in on them. But actually, no, they actually were fleeing. So it's kind of a unique, just small detail.
Well, even how the sea was split in the first place, because in the movies we see him just lift his staff and the sea is split, but the text says it took all night.
That's right.
For winds to blow and this to be done. So.
Yeah, and they created the two walls on each side, but then there was a time where the wind had to dry the land so they could walk through it and it wasn't just mud, because you can't get all your donkeys and your cattle and all of that, and your whatever carts they were carrying their bones with. You needed it. So this is why the Egyptians even thought it was plausible for them to take their chariots onto that dry land. It's fascinating. But what's up, baby? What sticks out to you in this chapter?
I do think it's interesting how in verse 14 he says that the Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. And it just reminds me of the resurrection.
That's right.
Yeah,
because on the day of the Lord, guys, Isaiah 26, 19-21, verse 19 is that the earth gives birth to departed spirits, and we're raised from Sheol, given our incorruptible bodies and our white robes of righteousness, and from the courier service of angels, we're going to be taken into the New Jerusalem, right? And we're going to be doing this in peace. And meanwhile, he's descending with his army angels to take out the wicked on the day of the Lord at the Battle of Armageddon and other places. This is why Paul talks about it in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13-18, where he says, so therefore we will rise in the air to meet him at his coming. Now, we're not going to confer with him and have some sort of meet and greet in the middle of the air, okay? All it's meaning is we're rising up to the New Jerusalem to be stowed away in safety, as Isaiah chapter 19, verse 20 tells us, to be hidden away in our rooms while the indignation takes place, right? So we're just going to basically see him coming as we're ascending, and that's fascinating, right? Yeah. Because I'm going to be like, pushing the angel's hair back so I can see, the Messiah coming down on his horse, man. So I just think that it's fascinating. And then, of course, after that's done, we'll get to meet him later. Yeah. We'll get to meet him later. But the point is, we're not going to be standing around shouting, "Yay, take him out!" Yeah. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. We're going to be silent in heaven. I should properly qualify. In the New Jerusalem, which is above the firmament temporarily until it comes down after the Battle of Armageddon, after the day of the Lord, and those circumstantial events are wrapped up, and it's appropriate for it to come down. And that's a whole other video. Yeah. It's a whole other qualifiers of many, many hundreds of scriptures that I'm going to do when I have the time in the future. So that'll be a part of the New Jerusalem branch on the context tree. But all right, what else sticks out in this particular chapter?
You wanted to mention the angel of God?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it does say this is another opportunity to talk about this concept of agency, because it can be confusing if you don't understand that concept, because at some points it's saying the Lord will go before you and the Lord himself will fight for you and the Lord will be your pillar in the day and at night. And then as we read and get some of the details, we see it's angels of the Lord who are doing these things.
That's right. And
so how does that work?
Agency of the Father, right. And that's where we've talked about in multiple episodes before, this concept of agency, where the Father, this is the reason the angels were created.
Right.
So they could go and do the will of the Father in different circumstances. Some of them go and speak the message of the Father, right? So in this passage here, I can't remember exactly what verse, but it says...
I think it was 19.
Yeah, there's quite a few places. I know it says in 19, the angel of God who had been going before the camp moved to go behind the camp. And in the same passage, it amplifies. It says that was the pillar of cloud, which stood before them, then it stood behind them, right? So it's just amplification. It's not two separate concepts because the angel was in the pillar. That's why later it says, and that's why it says right here in verse 24, at the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, right, and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. So we already were defined what was the pillar of cloud, which the angel is within, if you will. Yeah. All right. So this is actually going to match with one of our pairings, because we're going to pair up a small portion from Jubilees here at the end of the video, so stick with us because it's going to relate directly to what I'm about to say, okay? And as always, put your comments down below because to me, this is fascinating. The angel of the Lord involved in the Exodus event is highly debated by many, many people. So many people, so much so that they think it's just Jesus, right? Which that's not what Scripture says at all, guys. It's just an angel. This is their jobs. Jesus was hidden away before the Father until his first revealing through being born of Mary. We're told that in Enoch chapter 48, 1 through 5, all of Enoch chapter 62, and also Isaiah 49, 1 through 6. So the reason that we know that this is just an angel is because this is what angels were told to be doing. And this concept here is that they move in agency of the Father to do his will or to speak his message. And in this moment here, he's actually using this angel to be inside this pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud by day. How fascinating. Because we're actually going to see this angel speak later. I was blown away, guys. Blown away. As much as so this is where I've studied many of these concepts for years, but this one just finally stuck out to me after all this time. And so you guys, get to see something that's revelatory, new to me as well. And I'm just, I'm excited about it. We actually get to see not just him speak, but him speak for 47 chapters.
Right.
So the angel of God that we all acknowledge was there. Is it possibly the same angel that was in the bush? I don't know. Is it? But we know it's the angel of God because I'm going to show that to you later. That's in this pillar of cloud by day and fire by night that threw the Egyptians into confusion at the order of the Lord. That leads before them, that we're told in Exodus 23 will not pardon their sins, will not be nice to them, so obey him at all costs. Whatever the Lord tells him to tell them, make sure you obey that angel that goes before you. This guy was very integral to the whole storyline of Exodus. And just imagine this, sweetie. You're in this camp of 1.5 to 2 million people, okay? You got leader, this Moses guy, right? He's telling you what's going on. You're in the camp. You got your children with you. You got your donkey with you, whatever, your possessions, as little as you can carry. And you see an angel with you in a cloud or in a pillar of fire at all times. Because it's an actual angel, right? And he speaks at times. And we're going to show a moment where he actually, apparently, according to Galatians and Hebrews and other places, this guy in the book of Jubilees, was actually interacting with Moses in great detail. So this is the same guy that's speaking to Moses also the same angel presented himself to the entire congregation of the children of Israel as a visual sign, right? So I just think that's fascinating because it never really stuck out to me in that specific reality of you're a little kid, you're going through this craziness, you're 6 or 7 years old trying to process this, and all the while, you literally got a visual sign that you can look up and see going before you, right? And now you see this thing turn around and go behind you and protect you from this army that's coming to kill you. Praise the Lord, man. Praise the Lord. Talk about giving people faith. Talk about giving them something to visually believe in so that it's not just blind faith.
Right.
You know what I mean? I just think it's fascinating. What's on your mind, sir?
I was just going to mention that it seems as though we find out possibly what class I should put that in quotes. Yeah. Of angels, the angel of the Lord would be in.
Because, what order of creation? You're right.
Yeah, because there are different ranks, different classes
That's right. This is why typically we have these concept of an archangel,
right,
which is given to people like Michael and Gabriel and those guys because they have more responsibility than others.
Right.
And they have that kind of concept.
Higher rank.
That's right. Just like Jesus said in Matthew 5:20,
that
in the kingdom there'll be those who are considered greatest and least, depending on your behavior.
Right. So, it makes me think about the different layers of the firmament. Because like we talked about last week, maybe we didn't talk about it last week. I might have been talking about it on a Facebook post. But how we call the Father the Most High, that's Elohim, right. that means he's literally the highest up.
It's a directional term.
Yeah, that's right. So it just makes me think about these angels that have higher and higher rank. Like, okay, do they dwell in higher and higher levels of the firmament? Like, it's just something cool to think about. I couldn't give you any answers to those questions.
And the reasons why we would even speculate that is because the biblical model of creation, as defined in over 500 scriptures in the canon, describes that we live in a house, a big structure with multiple layers to it. And we're in one of the bottom layers and have a roof over us called a firmament. And then there's other levels of firmaments as several various scriptures describe and speak about. Deuteronomy 10:14 is one of them. So that's where we're getting that whole idea. All right, sweet.
One last thing before we move on to the next chapter I wanted to point out is this is the last we're going to see of it, but clearly we're still dealing with some of the insanity of Pharaoh, where he just goes back and forth, and he finally lets them go. But not for long, right? His heart is hardened again. He gets a crazy idea in his head again to go after them at this point. And for me, as I'm reading this, what stands out to me is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And Pharaoh clearly is not making very wise decisions here. He clearly completely lacks wisdom, and you can see it's because he has no fear of the Lord.
That's right.
And so while most of the time, for the most part, we look at that phrase, fear the Lord, as great awe and reverence and respect for the Lord. But at the same time, he can send massive plagues onto your nation and completely destroy everything you think you built over the last however many years of your life, and kill your firstborn and kill you if he wants to. And to not really have a proper fear of that is really unwise.
Well, that's we saw, I think it was last week during some of the plagues, his advisors come to him after the storm and lightning and the was it the hail? And they said to Pharaoh, "What are you doing? Can you not see Egypt is being destroyed?" And so this guy clearly had delved into madness.
Yeah.
Like, we're not talking about a right ruling king, right? And this reminds me of a song or proverb that talks about the unjust king, the people cry out, but with a righteous ruler, the people rejoice in the streets. I can't remember the address, I'm sorry. But that point is, this clearly is an unrighteous king, and there's just nothing but madness that caused oppression on the Hebrews and death to his own people and his own family. So on a big scale, like you're saying, it's just a great lesson about fearing the Lord and about righteous ruling, and this concept of Yahweh is just showing Pharaoh, you are not doing any of it.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the extent that your heart and your stubbornness and your wickedness and your madness will take you to, which will be a drawn-out process, basically, of consequential bad circumstances that eventually will lead to your death.
Yeah.
Because all along the way, he could have changed his mind. He could have had a moment to stop and not, But I think it's interesting at the beginning of this chapter where it talks about where they camped, and it spends quite a few sentences to reiterate where they camped. Because not only was it a place that was big enough for them all, but it was a place that seemed to have locked them in, right, with nowhere to go.
Right.
So this is where the Hebrews are crying out, what in the world? Why have you brought us here? Just to kill us? Well, we told you we were okay serving the Egyptians in Egypt, right? So from the Hebrews, it even looked like they were led to the wrong place, right? To the Egyptians, I'm sure they were laughing. Oh my goodness. Moses led them right into a place, where they can't escape. We got them, right? Not knowing the Father was going to part the sea for them.
Right.
And so I just think, and he says he does that so that Pharaoh would pursue after them, thinking that, I got them. You know what I mean? And so it's just the Father, playing a masterful chess game that Pharaoh can't keep up with, basically. All right. Do you want to read the next chapter? Chapter 15?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you, sweetie.
Then Moses and the sons of Israel sang this song to the Lord and said, I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will extol him. The Lord is a warrior, the Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea, and the choicest of his officers are drowned in the Red Sea. The deeps cover them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, is majestic in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy. And in the greatness of your excellence you overthrow those who rise up against you. You send forth your burning anger, and it consumes them as chaff. At the blast of your nostrils the waters were piled up. The flowing waters stood up like a heap. The deeps were congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall be gratified against them. I will draw out my sword, my hand will destroy them. You blew with your wind, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you among the gods, O Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in praises, working wonders? You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your loving kindness, you have led the people with whom you have redeemed. In your strength you have guided them to your holy habitation. The peoples have heard, they tremble. Anguish has gripped the inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom were dismayed. The leaders of Moab, trembling grips them. All the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. Terror and dread fall upon them. By the greatness of your army they are motionless as stone. Until your people pass over, O Lord, until the people pass over whom you have purchased. You will bring them and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, the place, O Lord, which you have made for your dwelling, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. The Lord shall reign forever and ever. For the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and his horsemen went into the sea, and the Lord brought back the waters of the sea on them. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea. Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and dancing. Miriam answered them, Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and his rider he has hurled into the sea. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, What shall we drink? Then he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he threw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. There he made for them a statute and a regulation, and he tested them. And he said, If you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms, and they camped there beside the waters.
Thank you, sweetie.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything stick out to you guys in this? This is a fascinating chapter to me.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Fascinating. I think next year we'll probably go into the 70 date palms.
Yeah.
And that whole concept, because there's a lot there, but we just didn't have time this year. But in the prayer itself, what did we see in verses 11 through 18? We saw the mention of Edom, the land of Canaan, and who else? Moab being afraid.
Yes.
Right? This just happened. We're talking like the next day.
Yeah.
How did any of those nations get word of what happened to Egypt?
Right.
Right? Okay, how does any of those nations would even possibly know that the Egyptian army, the whole Egyptian army was done, right? Was completely dead. And there's literally no one to defend Egypt, right?
Right.
And to attribute that to Yahweh, okay? Now we see several moments later, 3 months later, when Jethro shows up in chapter 18, that he says, yeah, we did hear what happened in Egypt. And wow. We also see in the book of Joshua, and I think it's chapter 5, where Rahab is telling the spies, the two spies that she's covering for, yeah, we did hear about what Yahweh did, against the Egyptians. Therefore, the Amorites are trembling, right? Yeah. And so that was 40 years later. Okay, this Exodus 15 is like 3 or 4 days, like the next day after the Red Sea event. Okay,
right.
So how in the world did those nations already know to be trembling? Just that's one clue, right? Then we also look down where Moses is praying, talking about taking the people of Israel, according to the strength and grace and power of the Lord, being taken into his sanctuary, right? When does that happen?
Not till the resurrection. Right. Certainly not in this moment here.
Not in this moment at all, but not until the kingdom come, guys. This is a moment of of actual Moses referencing the heavenly sanctuary that was shown to Jacob in Jubilees 32, that was shown to Genesis, or shown to Abraham in the Apocalypse of Abraham in, I think it's chapter 29 or 27, which was the Genesis 15 moment of that sacrifice there, in the moment he had the vision and saw all these things that the Apocalypse of Abraham fleshes out for us. So this whole concept is some of the patriarchs already knew about the sanctuary in heaven that they were going to build a copy of on the earth. And this is what we read a few weeks ago, how Jacob was so excited in Jubilees 32 when it was shown to him by the angels, and he was wanting to build it.
Yeah.
And God had to say, no, bro, you're not the one to build it. It's not going to be built here in Bethel, and go ahead and live your life and just go on with your business. But remember, Jacob was shown all the things that would befall him and his descendants of Israel throughout the ages. So he got a cliff notes of future history, right? And he saw the tabernacle that was going to be built in Israel, just like Abraham did. Moses doesn't get to see the tabernacle until the Mount Sinai moment, which is 10 chapters later, right? So here he is talking about it now in Exodus 15. As my wife and I have tried to share lovingly and many, many times in the past kingdom portions, guys, the patriarchs, the people of it, they already had the law. They already had a priesthood. They already had prophets giving visions of the future of the kingdom of God all the way back to the days of Enoch. So this whole concept is, and they had books they were writing in. Jubilees strictly tells us Abraham read the books of his father, of both Noah and Shem. They were passed down to him. And then all those books that Abraham got, he passed down to Jacob, who passed them to Levi, the priests, and his lineage, that would be the priests, so he could train them all in the priesthood to know why they're doing these things, these religious ordinances and sacraments, these whole concepts of how they're making atonement for people and going through these duties, and why they needed to be obedient and set apart, because they needed to know the vision, the end of the story, the reason they're going after this, right? The why they're running the race, as Paul put it, right? They needed to see the gospel of the kingdom of God. And that is the coming of his kingdom. And that is good news, right? And this is what Jesus preached everywhere he went. So this is why they already knew the gospel of the kingdom of God and were passing it down to people. And so here we have Moses coming in, literally speaking it in a song right after the first Passover and right after the moment where the Red Sea event happens. So I just think it's a beautiful little indication, tucked away. A lot of people kind of miss it. But these guys, that they knew the gospel of the kingdom of God, and it was part of their faith into action and motivation, right? And this is what all the prophets talked about, should be our faith into action and motivation towards righteousness, emulating our behavior after the Messiah, learning his ways, because that is the stuff that we're going to be doing when his kingdom comes.
Right.
So after the resurrection. So I get excited about it, clearly, because we don't get a lot of backstory on Moses.
Right.
Now, there's an apocryphal book called the Book of Jasher that my wife and I have mentioned a couple times, and we don't pair it, as you've noticed, simply because apparently the earliest known manuscript of Jasher is from the 16th century, from a Hebrew or a Jew that lived in Spain who translated it and claimed that that was a valid copy. Unfortunately, no versions or translations of Jasher were found with the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's not in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, which is one of the oldest biblical canons around for over 2,000 years. It's not in there either. And so some of the things that are mentioned in there, some of the details, do not line up with Genesis or Jubilees. And so therefore we have decided not to pair that book. We're still testing that book as far as seeing some of the validity of it. But it does have some backstory on Moses.
Yeah, there's interesting stories in it.
There's stories, but we don't know if they're legit or not, or truly inspired or not, because we struggle to find any other veneration from other books, to find a secondary witness, if you will. So that's why many of you, the reason I say that is I know that many of you out there have read Jasher, and you're going, Sean, how dare you say that? There's lots of backstory to Moses. It's in the book of Jasher. It's like chapter 70 through 80 something. And I know, I've read the book of Jasher. I've studied it, and I'm still studying it. And there's a lot of fun stuff in there that I would love to talk about. Oh my goodness. Like if I was just trying to create clickbait videos, to grow this channel, I would be throwing Jasher up all day long because it's fanciful. It's amazing. There's really interesting stories. And I'm not saying anything in there is not legit. I'm just saying at this point in our ministry, we're still testing that. Therefore, we're not pairing it with these kingdom portions. But yes, in Genesis and Jubilees, we don't get a lot of backstory, but clearly Moses knew from all the,
Right.
because remember, he was a Levite, as we talked about
Right.
in a couple episodes ago. He was a Levite, born in a Levite family. His brother's chosen to be a high priest because he's a Levite. There was history already there. They already have a priesthood. We're going to talk about that in the next portion in chapter 19. And all the Levites were tasked to know the story. This is how they taught these things to other people, right? We're actually, I think, going to even read that further in the next chapter.
Right.
So anything else stick out to you in this chapter?
Yeah, I think that it's cool that it's mentioned here that Miriam was a prophetess.
Yeah.
Because, you don't get a whole lot of stories involving Miriam aside from her, she's got a bad reputation from the whole being struck with leprosy and being left out of the camp thing because of, her attitude. But it's interesting to note, the role that women play, in, this process of bringing people out of Israel and ultimately preaching the gospel of the kingdom, because I think a lot of people forget that the title prophet or prophetess doesn't mean that person just sat in a cave somewhere and predicted the future all the time.
That's right.
Being a prophet is having the ability to basically speak the word of God with authority, basically expound on the word of God, teach people the gospel of the kingdom.
Which would assume that you know it.
Right. I would hope that Miriam would know the gospel of the kingdom, being in that inner circle.
Yeah, with Aaron and Moses.
Clearly she does, because she's referred to as a prophetess.
That's right.
So I just think that it's skipped over a lot in the Old Testament and the New Testament, this word prophetess, and these women who, while they weren't in positions of authority over the children of Israel, they did have a role in expounding on the word of God and teaching people, the gospel of the kingdom, and teaching the other women. I mean, I'm sure there was authority structures within the women.
And to the point where Yahweh respected her enough to call her forward to his presence,
right,
as we're going to read later in future chapters, to reprimand her.
Yeah.
Right? He just didn't go through Moses and say, go reprimand Miriam.
Right.
Right? No, he gave her the respect of getting some face-to-face reprimands.
Right.
That says something, guys. I'm not just being or trying to make a joke. that's the Father respects women immensely. Yeah. He respects all things he created. I mean, but he created an authority structure through the man, and that's what Scripture defines. But that doesn't mean he doesn't respect women.
Right.
In fact, as we've said in multiple episodes, especially when we were going through the book of Deuteronomy, we were pointing out all the different laws that protect women, right? That give women better protection than modern day civil right protections, right? In our quote unquote progressive nation that we live in. So the Torah is just his ways, which is his instructions in Torah, his ways, inherently and automatically gives great respect to women.
Right.
So, yeah.
And Sean and I respect the structure of authority, and Sean is he's my spiritual authority. He's the head of this household, and I am, in full submission to that and respect that. And it doesn't bother me. When I was an unbeliever and a terrible feminazi, this kind of stuff bothered me.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't give credence to a statement like that, straight up calling Miriam a prophetess and giving her that position that she, clearly was worthy of, having that title. So it's fun for me to read this stuff now, because before I totally had a blindness to all of the respect there really is for women in this book. The first person that Jesus appeared to after his resurrection was Mary Magdalene. It was a woman.
Right.
So I don't know if that's significant of, women are so much more important than men or anything like that, that some feminists take the Mary Magdalene thing and go wild with it.
Yeah, we know there's some...
It's terrible.
But,
the women seem to be the ones who didn't flee at the resurrection. They seem to be the ones who stuck around and, so.
We also have in Jubilees the mention of both Rebecca and Sarah being called righteous women above all the women around them.
Yeah.
And they were getting major props in the book. We just didn't go over that because it didn't really have a lot of point of discussion for our parents. But Jubilees gives much props to Rebecca and Sarah. So,
yeah, ladies, we have women to strive to be like.
Yeah, and it calls them righteous. And the biblical definition and the Jubilees definition of righteousness is that they follow the ways of the Father, just like Abraham was commended for his righteousness for following the commandments, statutes, ordinances, precepts of Yahweh. Same definition applies to Sarah and Rebecca and any other woman the Bible considers righteous, right? Like Hannah, or Anna, the prophetess in Luke 2.
Right.
So, we had a lot of indoctrination in our modern culture, guys, that does everything it can to twist everything that this thing says.
Right.
So that's why we have to retrain our minds. You know what I'm saying? Like Lex Meyer talks about, right? We have to unlearn.
Yeah.
That's the kind of the premise. All right, so I guess we'll read chapter 16 now, and we'll keep moving.
Yeah, and if there was anything that you saw in that chapter that like spoke to you or you found meaningful or just a fun fact type thing, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Let us know.
Yeah, definitely. All right, guys, chapter 16. It says, Then they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month, after their departure from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the sons of Israel said to them, Would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether or not they will walk in my instruction. And on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, At evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your grumblings against the Lord. And what are we, that you grumble against us? Moses said, This will happen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and bread to the full in the morning. For the Lord hears your grumblings, which you grumbled against him. And what are we? Your grumblings are not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, Say to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumblings. It came about as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the grumblings of the sons of Israel. Speak to them, saying, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with the bread. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So it came about at evening that the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew evaporated, behold, on the surface of the wilderness there was a fine flake-like thing, fine as the frost on the ground. And when the sons of Israel saw it, they said to one another, What is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, It is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it every man as much as he should eat. You shall take an omer apiece, according to the number of persons each of you has in his tent. The sons of Israel did so, and some gathered much and some little. And when they measured it with an omer, he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who had gathered little had no lack. Every man gathered as much as he should eat. Moses said to them, Let no man leave any of it until morning. But they did not listen to Moses, and some left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and became foul, and Moses was angry with them. They gathered it morning by morning, every man as much as they should eat, but when the sun grew hot, it would melt. Now on the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. When all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, then he said to them, This is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is a Sabbath observance, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you will bake, and boil what you will broil. And all that is left over, put aside to be kept until morning. So they put it aside until morning, as Moses had ordered, and it did not become foul, nor was there any worm in it. Moses said, Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. It came about on the 7th day that some of the people went out together, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath, therefore he gives you bread for 2 days on the 6th day. Remain every man in his place, and let no man go out of his tent on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. The house of Israel named it manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and its taste was like wafers with honey. Then Moses said, This is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer full of it be kept throughout your generations, that they may see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Moses said to Aaron, Take a jar, put an omer full of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. The sons of Israel ate the manna 40 years, until they came to an inhabited land. They ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now an omer is 1/10 of an ephah. All right. All right. We just have to, we have to remind ourselves that we face this in our own lives, right?
Yeah.
We get excited about the Father. We grow in discipleship towards Him. But there's still things that all of us continue to grow in obedience over. And as the Father said at the very beginning, He told Moses right off the bat, I'll rain bread down for them, but I'm going to give you instructions on how they're supposed to gather it up, and I'm going to test them to see if they're going to actually obey.
Right.
Right? So here's just a quick point that I wanted to bring up for a lot of people, okay? So this concept of testing somebody,
Yeah.
right? The Father testing somebody. That word testing is not the same as tempting.
Right.
The word tempting has the context and the definition of leading towards an evil action,
Yeah.
right? Father puts in front of them a good action and says, I'll see if you do this or not. And he calls that a test.
Right.
Right? So it's totally different. He puts in front of them an opportunity to obey and calls that a test.
Right.
Right? So we know, as Scripture tells us, the Father does not tempt anyone with evil. Right? But in Hebrews chapter 11, it says that he tested Abraham with Isaac. Jubilees chapter, 18, there was 10 different ways he tested Abraham, and Abraham proved faithful in every single one. Right? And every single one led to righteous behavior, not towards evil. Same thing we're looking at here in this moment about, are they going to gather the manna for 6 days and not try to gather it on the seventh day? They failed the test.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to see later when we go back to Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2, he says on a broad scale, throughout the whole time they were in the wilderness, he said he gave them his commandments. Yahweh gave the children of Israel's commandments to see if they would do them, to test their hearts, whether or not they would actually keep his instructions or not. And of course, we see that some of them did, some of them didn't, right? There was a mixed bag there, and penalties were brought in on several occasions, and we read that all throughout Exodus through Deuteronomy. But here's just another one of those moments, right? He's not tempting them to do anything evil. Picking up manna 6 days a week and not picking up on the seventh is not evil. He's giving them a chance to be obedient, and he calls that a test.
Yeah.
Just want to clarify that.
Yeah, and I kind of really like his sense of humor, too, because here they are grumbling against Moses yet again. Poor Moses. Grumbling specifically about the bread.
Hashtag poor Moses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Specifically grumbling about how they missed the bread and the pots of meat in Egypt. And so what does the Father do? I mean, he gives them bread in abundance, and we see him bringing along the pheasants later on. So it's just kind of funny how he, he's, you want bread? I'll give you so much bread, you got to make sure you collect the right amount, and I'll give you, meat till it's coming out your nose, Yeah,
and he didn't just give them, horrible bread.
Right. He gave them the bread of heaven, and they still complain.
Not just that. Well, yes, you're exactly right. He gave them the bread of heaven. What I'm saying is, go to your local store today and get a loaf of white bread and try to eat that by itself.
Yeah.
We don't consider that in any way a special thing, right? It's just it's bread. You know what I mean? Apparently this bread tastes like coriander seed and honey. Yeah. That sounds like some fancy bread. Yeah. Right? That's not just any type of bread. It tasted good. You know? I mean, and it had, that a type of sugar in it which would give them energy. Right. And it's not just what's it called? The starch from bread, the sugary starch from bread that gives you. It's not the same as the same kind of energy that you get from honey, basically. Right. So the point is, I'm just saying how interesting that we're promised that in the paradise that comes down, the New Jerusalem that comes down, is a land flowing with milk and honey. Yeah. And he gives them bread that's tastes like honey, and coriander seed. I just think, and of course we're going to read in a parent later, he literally calls it the bread of angels. Right. So this was apparently not just something that.
It wasn't Wonder Bread, that's for sure.
Right, it wasn't normal. He didn't just blow it in with a wind from Assyria or something. Yeah. It was literally being dropped through the firmament somehow. Yeah. So that's amazing. What else sticks out to you in this chapter, sweetie?
Well, we have a perfect opportunity to address the context of this concept of whether or not to cook on the Sabbath.
Cue the sound effects. Dun, dun, dun.
Trigger warning.
All right, guys. I made a video 6-8 months ago called "Can I Cook on the Sabbath?" It's a part of my morning cup of context, and I'll flash the thumbnail here on the screen. You can go find it.
Can I tell them how this video came about? How it started with me?
Sure.
Okay, guys. So when I first came into walking in the commandments, I naturally kind of Google things about how to keep the Sabbath. And one of the very first things that pops up, and this is from the Jewish websites, which it's bled over into the Messianic Christian websites, was basically rule number 1, no cooking. Get all your food cooked the day before and figure out how to...
No cooking on the Sabbath is what
no cooking on the Sabbath. Yeah. It's top 3 rules that they'll give you. And so for the longest time, I followed that rule. I never really bothered to go and look it up in the scriptures. I kind of had read it here in Exodus in passing and hadn't really considered the context. And so for, I don't know, a year and a half, I was buying microwave meals or like pasta salads, things that were okay for me to eat cold the next day, or, you know, a microwave meal because I didn't know what else to do. And when Sean and I got married, he would cook pancakes on Shabbat, and I would have my little microwave meal. And I said to him one day, is it okay, you know, if we cook pancakes? Like, I was trying to, like, bring this up to him, and I didn't know how, you know, I wasn't sure if it was my place to correct him in any kind of way. And when he asked me, what do you mean? And I said, well, isn't it a sin to cook on the Sabbath? And he looked at me and said, well, where does it say that in the scriptures? So what did I do? I immediately Googled it, and it brought up this verse from Exodus, and Sean and I read the chapter in its totality and read all the context surrounding it, and he helped me to realize the context is very clearly this moment in the wilderness with them being tested with the manna. We never see this commandment repeated later on. It's specifically about gathering manna, and it sounds like the manna would spoil overnight, so they had to cook it if they wanted to save enough for the next day for the Sabbath. So I just want to...
This is why the text takes so much extra time to tell you. Some of them tried to keep a portion of it, not eating all of their daily amount, but try to keep some of it for the next day, and it would spoil. And which means suddenly you brought uncleanness into the camp.
Right.
So there was 2 issues that it was creating. Not only were they disobeying the Father, but the manna itself had a short expiration date.
Right.
Except for the manna that fell on the 6th day. That one lasted 48 hours instead of 24 hours for the purpose of them not having to gather on the Sabbath, which is a command of not gathering your food. Don't go out and hunt. Don't go to the grocery store and buy it. Don't, go to the well and gather your water in your pot and bring it back a mile back to your house. Yeah. That was work. The point was to gather all your food and have it in your house by the end of the 6th day. That way, all you had to do on the Sabbath day was a day of feasting and joy and relaxation. Right? Because, as the context and as the video that was up on the screen there, that I encourage everyone to go watch a fuller breakdown on this. Because, sweetie, as you're talking about this, a lot of people are thinking, well, but Exodus 32 says no cooking a fire or no kindling a fire. Yeah. And if you look in the actual, and I break it down in the video, the actual Hebrew of that word is talking about a vocational fire. It's a fire you would use for an occupation that made you money, right? That was a part of your job or your business. So it's not talking about a fire within your house. You can't. It's not saying it's not saying that since the Sabbath starts at evening, right? Leviticus 23. Yeah. The Sabbath starts at evening. And for that darkness time period, you can't even have a light on in your house,
or stay warm.
Or stay warm in the cold wintertime in the coldest months of the year. No, the Father's very practical, and His word in context in Exodus 16 and Exodus 32 is not about it does not instruct you to refrain from cooking on the Sabbath a meal for yourself. It refrains you from starting a fire and doing business.
Right.
Or going out and gathering stuff for your household, which would be a part of some people's business. Yeah. Depends on what kind of business they're in. And the point was to get your preparations that you needed so that you didn't, unless there was some sort of emergency, as Jesus explains in Matthew 12, you didn't really have to even leave your house. You could just relax. Right? And you already had the food you need to make. You already had the water or the drink or whatever you're going to drink. And you just made your meal and relaxed. Focused on the Lord. Right? Which is what we're going to be doing in the kingdom.
Yeah.
Right? We're not going to have to leave the city. We're not going to have to go and gather food. It's all going to be there for us. So again, these things, and we're not going to be doing jobs that gain money. So the whole concept was, this was to emulate the behavior, to teach them just in a first series of reteaching them how to observe Sabbath, to emulate the behavior that we're going to be doing in the kingdom.
Right.
So technically, you've got to watch that video, guys, because I even go into Jubilees 50 and how it explains how to gather what you're gathering into your house, and it breaks it down. So, I know for some people you might be triggered at this point, but as always, we encourage you to, I've made an entire simplified resource for you to test, putting scriptures on screen about this topic, and I encourage you to go check it out. I'll have the link in the description.
Yeah, and I just want to testify that I had a huge burden lifted off of me when it came to keeping the Sabbath, when I realized this wasn't a law that I was bound to be keeping, and it didn't make any logical sense. And I love that, my husband and I can, cook a cook breakfast and eat together on the Sabbath because we don't get to do that during the week because both of us work and we have different schedules and all that stuff. So it's like become a special thing for me where, our Sabbath breakfast, it's like, we get to actually sit down and do that. And before, I was buying little, turkey sausage, egg things to put in the microwave, and that was my breakfast, and that's not healthy anyways.
Well, let's keep it, let's bring people back, because I know a lot of people right now might be thinking, well, that's the way you guys interpret it. As always, let me bring some scriptures to this, okay? So what are we reading about the Feast of Unleavened Bread that we just read about from last week and that we saw that they're going to be celebrating this week, right? The Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is a time where it's an actual, 7-day observance starting the day after Passover on the 15th to where they have 7 days of feasting. Well, the first day and the last day of that 7-day feast is a high Sabbath, right? Which are called Sabbaths. So it's not just a weekly Sabbath where we practice instructions for how to behave on the Sabbath, but it's also on these feast days that are also called Sabbaths. And they're literally called feasts.
Right.
Which means you're making food, and you're not making food 8 days before and then eat leftovers for 7 days. They had food every day of the feast, even up to the last day, which was a high Sabbath. Same thing with the Sukkot, or Feast of First Fruits and Feast of Weeks, which is Shavuot. Same thing with Feast of Sukkot. This whole concept that they would actually have a feast, and they called that day a Sabbath. This is why we read the context, even in Deuteronomy 12 and 14, where the Lord is instructing the people of Israel to come before him to his presence at his house, to the doorway of the tent of meeting, with their sacrifices, and eat a meal before the Lord.
The priests were definitely cooking on Shabbat.
Yes, so the whole point of this, well, Jesus talks about how the priests broke the Sabbath because they were instructed to, but the whole concept of this is us learning kingdom behavior. How we're going to interact and how we're going to behave inside his house in the New Jerusalem when it comes in the future. And part of that that's why the whole thing is called his rest. When he talks about they will not enter my rest, or in Hebrews chapter 4 it says there still remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God, right? It's talking about existing in his kingdom in the New Jerusalem. And our behavior inside there will be eating and drinking and feasting.
Yeah.
Doing these things. I mean, the first thing that happens is we have a marriage supper of the Lamb. Yeah. So the point of what my wife was lovely articulating was when she first came into this, like so many believers do, and they realize that, oh my goodness, these commandments are relevant to us today. And that they're calling to mind, as the fulfillment of Deuteronomy 30 verse 1 tells us, they're calling to mind that God's instructions have not gone away. And it is actually how we walk with him and have joy. And they want to start doing them, right? So well, who do you go to find out? Because the mainstream churches aren't teaching how to do them. So how do you find out how to do them? Well, you start Googling like Messianic believers, or people unfortunately start Googling Judaism sources, right? And Judaism, as we've explained in multiple videos, is not the ways of Yahweh, right? They hold up the ways of Yahweh, but then they add on all these extra rules. Right. And this is one that they've added on over time, is that you can't cook on the Sabbath. That is not in Scripture. Yeah.
It even gets into like these crazy debates where they study at what point of heat a food actually scientifically is cooking, and you can have something on a crock pot at a certain temperature, but if it's one notch higher, then that food will actually be cooked. It just gets into all kinds of complicated legalism, and I'm telling you, a burden is lifted when you realize you don't have to worry about all that stuff. Shabbat is supposed to be, it was made for us, and when people direct you to, you want to learn about the feast days? Go to Leviticus 23. The first appointed time that the Father lists out is the weekly Sabbath. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people miss that. Mm-hmm. The weekly Sabbath is a feast day.
That's right.
We're supposed to get together and eat.
He wants to have a date with you every Saturday. Yeah. That's kind of, if I could put it in modern terms. But as she was saying, like in modern day cultural Judaism that is practiced in Israel, they reject Messiah, and therefore they reject the commandments of God from Yahweh, because if you reject the Son, you've rejected the Father, right? As Jesus told us. And they practice and teach Judaism in their nation to the point where, like she talked about, to see an extent of their legalistic application, they have entire elevators in buildings that don't run on the Sabbath for Hebrews. But if you're Goyim, if you're not of the faith, or if you're Muslim, they have a separate elevator that you can take that will actually work on the Sabbath. I mean, that's Judaism, and this is what Jesus preached against, the traditions and the commandments of men. That was a heavy yoke and a heavy burden that is impossible for man to keep. And that's why he said his instructions, right, in the Torah were light.
Right.
They were what would bring you joy in John chapter 15. Like he said, I do the commandments of my Father, and I have joy. So therefore, if you do these commandments that I'm teaching you, which are the commandments of my Father, you too will have joy, and your joy will be full. Yeah. So I mean, this is why we're always trying to draw the sharp distinction between what Judaism has tried to mask themselves as opposed to what actually the Word of God teaches. Right? So that's where, anyway, I'll get off that box, but I just want to encourage you guys to check out the video, and we've definitely spent enough time on that.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to read the 17?
Yes, I will do that. And of course, there's a lot in chapter 16 you might have seen that, spoke to you. So drop it in the comments. Study with us. We don't want people to feel like this is just some lecture or teaching. Like, we want to study with you. So,
absolutely.
All right. Chapter 17. Then all the congregation of the sons of Israel journeyed by stages from the wilderness of Sin, according to the command of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses, and said, Give us water that we may drink. And Moses said to them, Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? But the people thirsted there for water, and they grumbled against Moses, and said, Why now have you brought us up from Egypt, to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, What shall I do to this people? A little more, and they will stone me. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pass before the people, and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand your staff, with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He named the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarrel of the sons of Israel, and because they tested the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not? Then Amalek came and fought against Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, Choose men for us and go out, fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses told him, and fought against Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. So it came about when Moses held his hand up that Israel prevailed, and when he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy. Then they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, and Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other. Thus his hands were steady until the sun set. So Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, Write this in a book as a memorial and recite it to Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar and named it The Lord is my banner, and he said, The Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war against Amalek from generation to generation.
Thank you, sweetie.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Meribah and Massah.
Yeah.
Interesting thought, huh?
Yeah, there's a little, I noticed this in my, the NASB is what we use, by the way, guys, just for these studies.
It's not the only Bible we have or use. It's just the one that we read.
Yeah, if you're wondering what translation we read from. But the little notes on the bottom of my NASB that I hadn't noticed before is that the name Massah means test and Meribah means quarrel. Mm-hmm. So I just found that interesting. Just something I never knew.
Appropriate for what Moses is dealing with here, right? And that's why in multiple places in the future, those two names are referenced by the Father when he's talking about disobedience. And he uses those interchangeably.
Right.
So that's something I just think people need to be aware of, is that like it's not talking about two different places or even two different time periods. He just sometimes calls it Massah, sometimes he calls it Meribah, right? The bitterness of the waters of Meribah, right? Yeah. So anyway, I just think it's helpful to know for context. Yeah. Also, this is an introduction to Amalek.
Right.
So they get some army come upon them. Why? Because as we read earlier, this is like a month or so later, right? So word spread.
Yeah.
Egyptian army's gone.
Yeah.
What happened to Egypt? Oh my goodness, they were destroyed. Their army's gone. And as a result of all these Hebrews took all the gold and silver with them and got out of town.
Right.
Like, oh my goodness. So this is a natural inclination from the wicked nations around them, which is, these Hebrew slaves are out in the desert with no one to defend them, with all the gold and silver of Egypt. let's go out there and attack them.
Yeah.
And they try to attack them. And this is where they do catch a couple people straggling along. Because remember, the encampment of these, what people suggest to be almost 2 million people, with women and children included, and animals, that takes a large swath of land to travel in a big caravan.
Right.
Okay, they're not all tightly knit like sardines in a can walking shoulder to shoulder. So they're all spread out over time. There's some apocryphal books that claim they were spread out over a 3-mile distance as they traveled. Okay, so this is claiming that Amalek came up in his armies to try to, take out the ones that traveled slower, right, the weaker ones. And the father is extremely angry because of that. And then therefore we see this moment where Joshua goes out with Moses, and Aaron and Hur helping him out. But we see this moment where they go out to defeat them, to fight them off, right? Because they're like, hyenas basically at this point, scavenging on what they think is a vulnerable prey.
Right.
But they get taught a lesson, right? Because they're not vulnerable at all. As we said at the very beginning of this episode, these guys were already battle hardened, and now they're about to be even more battle hardened in the years to come, which makes perfect sense for all the things we see take place in the book, in the first 13 chapters of Joshua. So I just think this is interesting because now we have an actual origin story for this animosity between Amalek and Yahweh, because this is mentioned in multiple other places in Scripture. And a lot of people don't realize this, but it even bleeds into the book of Esther. During the days of the Babylonian exiles, of the Hebrews who were in exile in Babylon, when Haman tried to create a plot of mass genocide to wipe out all the Hebrews who were in exile, and he was an Agagite, if I'm saying that right. So people have traced that the Agagites were the long-standing descendants of the Amalekites, right, whom we see an introduction to here. So that's why Haman is highlighted as he is, and is trying to do this particular plot of genocide against the Hebrews as he was in the book of Esther, because they had a long-standing history to where Yahweh specifically announced against those people, because you tried to kill my sons and daughters when they were at a moment of vulnerability, I'm going to come after you forever. Right, because there was animosity. And there's a lot of other speculation about Nephilims going on with the Amalekites and who they really were and everything. Rob Skiba does a good breakdown on the origins of the name of the Amalekite and how they were a Nephilim tribe. But you actually have a real-world kind of testimony about a story about running into somebody.
Just to show how this ancient beef or feud or animosity, however you want to call it, still bleeds into today between the animosity between the occult and Yahweh. 6 months ago, I was listening to stuff on YouTube and, on my autoplay, an interview came up, and I can't for the life of me remember the title of it. I wish I could. But this person was a former occultist. They hadn't come to Christ, unfortunately. But they had come out of the occult, and this person was sharing their story of, as they were being raised in a generational satanic family, his family taught him that they were descended from the Amalekites, and that the God of the Bible hated the Amalekites and intended to blot out their name from under heaven. And it was interesting because this guy had this animosity towards the God of the Bible. It was part of the reason he still hadn't come into knowledge of Christ. He still rejected the Bible, even though he thankfully had left this satanic cult he was raised in. He wasn't quite, on board with the Bible itself. But he talked, apparently occult, families who generationally raise their children according to their versions of history, there are still people who teach their children that they're descended of the Amalekites, and the God of the Bible has beef with the Amalekites. So it was just interesting to me to randomly hear that one day, because I knew it was while we were doing our portions on Deuteronomy, and there are all these mentions of, blotting out the name of Amalekite, and you kind of, when you're just in Deuteronomy, you think, well, geez, what's that about? Well, it goes all the way back to this incident here in the Exodus, and it bleeds all the way into that ongoing feud today between the secret dark arts and the people who practice them, and the Father who does everything in the open for all of us to see.
That's
so
right.
Just an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah, there's definitely the occult. They know and believe the Bible more than most believers.
Right, they just completely pervert it and choose to reject it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really twisted, but they realize that a lot of this history is real because they have their own books that talk and supplement some of these ideas from their twisted perspective.
Right, and their own genealogies.
That's right, yeah. So yeah, it's definitely a long-standing beef that finds its finality at the second coming of Yeshua, and we're so expectant and happy for that day. All right, let's go into our pairings real quick.
Okay.
So we're going to look at this week. We're looking at the Psalm 78. We're just going to read out of that real quick because this is a great little summation of some of the things that we already just read, but it adds some fun details for people to consider. And it gets us into the Psalms, which I love as well. So we're going to be reading verses 1 through verse 32. Here in Psalm 78, it says, "Listen, O my people, listen to my instruction. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable, and I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us." By the way, guys, many translations will just say mysterious sayings. This particular version says dark sayings. Dark is not always used in the context of being evil.
Right.
All right, so verse 3, "Which we have heard and known and our fathers have told us. We will not conceal them from their children, but tell them to the generation to come, the praises of the Lord, and his strength and his wondrous works that he has done. For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should teach them to their children, that the generation to come might know, even the children yet born to be born, that they might arise and tell them to their children. They should put their confidence in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not prepare its heart, whose spirit was not faithful to God. The sons of Ephraim were archers equipped with bows, yet they did not turn back in the day of battle. They did not keep the covenant of God and refused to walk in his law. They forgot his deeds and his miracles that he had shown them. He wrought wonders before their fathers in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zoan. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through. He made the waters stand up like a heap. Then he led them with the cloud by day, and all the night with the light of fire. He split the rocks in the wilderness, and he gave them abundant drink like the ocean depths. He brought forth streams also from the rock, and he caused waters to run down like rivers. Yet they still continued to sin against him, to rebel against the Most High in the desert. And in their heart they put God to the test, by asking food according to their desire. Then they spoke against God. They said, "Can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Behold, he struck the rocks so that waters gushed out and streams were overflowing. Can he give bread also? Will he provide meat for his people?" Therefore the Lord heard and was full of wrath. A fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also mounted against Israel, because they did not believe in God, and yet did not trust in his salvation. Yet he commanded the clouds above and opened the doors of heaven. He rained down manna upon them to eat, and gave them food from heaven. Man did eat the bread of angels. He sent them food in abundance. He caused the east wind to blow in the heavens, and by his power he directed the south wind, when he rained meat upon them like the dust, even winged fowl like the sand of the seas. Then he let them fall in the midst of their camp, round about their dwellings. So they ate and were well filled, and their desire he gave to them. Before they had satisfied their desire, while their food was in their mouths, the anger of God rose against them and killed some of their stoutest ones, and subdued the choice men of Israel. Wow. All right. Psalm 78 is awesome. It continues to go on in a summary fashion. I would encourage everyone to continue reading that whole passage. But it just kind of gives us a little bit of a further example of some of the things that happen. And the reason why we wanted to pair this is just to remind people, because people might be saying, "Sweetie, well, what was the point of that? You just repeated basically what we just read in Exodus 16. What we read in Exodus 16, we also have fleshed out for us in Numbers 20, is it? Is it Numbers 20 or Numbers chapter 10? About the when the quail falls and he speaks the rock, strikes to it.
I thought it was Numbers 11.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so it's Numbers 11. I'm sorry. Absolutely. So we get further explanation in Numbers 11 of this event going down that's summarized for us in Exodus 16. We've made the statement in multiple episodes previously, both Genesis and Exodus. They're speaking about lots of events in short amounts of time, so things are summarized. This is why we have things further fleshed out for us in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which sounds like it's repeating itself, because Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy take for granted the idea that these ideas were summarized in Genesis and Exodus. That's why so many people, there's a joke, right, that some people who take things out of context think that the book of Deuteronomy is a second 40 years in the wilderness.
Right.
Right? Because the point is, it's just going over the same event, but it's expounding with greater details to give you some of the backstory, because you already got the introduction to all these big ideas quickly. And that's what we get with Exodus. Okay, so we'll go on to our next pairing real quick. And if you had any comments about what we just read in Psalms, please be sure to put it in the comments below.
Yeah, the Psalms are great. And I just love how this, being brought out of Egypt, this is an event that it's echoed all through the rest of the book. I mean, we see Stephen summarizing it, as he's being stoned to death. So it's just really cool to watch this. This is the event it's like the event that foreshadows what we're waiting for in our ultimate Passover. And
that's right.
So it makes sense that it would be repeated and told over and over and over again throughout the book.
From guys who are also teaching the gospel of the kingdom of God.
Right.
Which is what Stephen talked about, Paul talked about.
Yeah.
Yeshua preached, John the Baptist preached. Peter preaches it in 2 Peter 3:10 and many other places.
Hebrews 2?
Yeah, this next pairing is going to be in Hebrews chapter 2, and it looks like we'll be reading verses 1 through 9.
All right.
Yeah.
Or 1 through 8?
Yeah, 1 through 8.
Okay. For this reason, we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away from it. For if the word spoken through angels proved unalterable, and every transgression and disobedience received a just penalty, how will we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? After it was at the first spoken through the Lord, it was confirmed to us by those who heard. God also testifying with them, both by signs and wonders, and by various miracles, and by gifts of the Holy Spirit according to his own will. For he did not subject to angels the world to come, concerning which we are speaking. But one has testified somewhere, saying, What is man that you remember him, or the Son of Man that you are concerned about him? You have made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, and have appointed him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet. For in subjecting all things to him, he left nothing that is not subject to him. But now we do not yet see all things subjected to him.
Thank you, sweetie. There it is, guys. it's the writer of Hebrews himself is just talking in plain words that we're still waiting for the kingdom come.
Yeah.
Where the moment where Yeshua reigns as king and all things are subjected to him. And right now we're in an interim time where we're just waiting on this. But what she just read in verse 1 and 2 was what we wanted to point out as well, was this idea that angels mediated the Torah on Mount Sinai. We also see this, Paul says this in Galatians chapter 3 as well. Okay? And the reason for that is because what we read earlier in Exodus 15 about the angel of God, or Exodus 14, about the angel of God who went before them in the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. This is just one of the angels.
Right.
That mediated the law of God. And we're going to prove that here in a minute with some of our pairings and Jubilees. But real quick, we're going to go into the wisdom of Solomon, and that's going to be in chapter 10, verses 15 through 21.
Yeah, and just to point out to you guys, Paul would not have had any other book to give him that information about the angels mediating the law, except for Jubilees. We don't see that explicitly stated in the 5 books of Moses that are established as the 5 books of Moses.
That's right.
But Jubilees very clearly explains that this was done through the agency of angels. And so Paul is basically quoting Jubilees in Galatians. So if anyone's wondering where he got that from, we would contend it's from the book of Jubilees.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's because the book of Jubilees itself, it makes the claim that it was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. And we're going to go in that just for a few minutes here. But let's first read from the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 10, and we're going to be going from verses 15 through 21. Verse 15 says, "A holy people and a blameless race, wisdom delivered from a nation of oppressors. She entered the soul of a servant of the Lord and withstood dread kings with wonders and signs. She gave holy men the reward of their labors. She guided them along a marvelous way, and became a shelter to them by day and a starry flame through the night. She brought them over the Red Sea and led them through deep waters, but she drowned their enemies and cast them up from the depth of the sea. Therefore the righteous plundered the ungodly. They sang hymns, O Lord, to your holy name, and praised with one accord your defending hand, because wisdom opened the mouth of the dumb and made the tongues of babes speak clearly." All right, so that's just a wonderful little example of Wisdom being personified, just like we see in Proverbs chapter 8. This happens a lot in the Wisdom of Solomon. He uses the term wisdom and then shows how it was used in application throughout these events in a personification. And that's what we just saw, recapping what we just read from Exodus, which is amazing. But it also mentioned the cloud by day and the flame by night, right? So let's get into that real quick, guys, because this is when I said at the beginning of the video that we're so excited to bring to you this idea that the angel of God who was in this cloud by day, flame of fire by night, who at times, like it said in, Exodus 14, where it said God looked down through the cloud, right? So what does that mean? How is this angel being used like this in this kind of agency? I've heard some people say it's like basically like having Wi-Fi. Like the angel is relaying events and information, or just like the Father can like just use the angel's eyes, because the Father himself can't descend, otherwise everything would die. Yeah. Right, and the world would. So that's talked about in multiple places in scriptures. So that's why he uses his angels to gather information, to communicate information. Remember Sodom and Gomorrah, when the angels show up and they say, "Well, we wanted to go see if the cries in Sodom were as we were told," right? So they went to go get a secondary witness. That's what these angels are being used for, which is why 3 angels showed up in Exodus 8 or Genesis 18. So this is this concept here where this angel of God is being used by the Father to protect them and to lead them, and also to communicate to them. Right. And this is fascinating. So let's go real quick to Jubilees chapter 1, and we're going to be looking at verse 28, basically. Just the last verse of chapter 1, and then we'll go into the first few verses of chapter 2. So here in Jubilees 1, last verse of chapter 1, verse 28, it says, "And the angel of the presence who went before the camp of Israel took the tables of the divisions of the years from the time of the creation of the law and the testimony of the weeks of the Jubilees, according to the individual years, according to all the numbers of the Jubilees, from the day of the creation when the heavens and the earth shall be renewed, and all their creation according to the powers of the heavens, according to all the creation of the earth, until the sanctuary of the Lord shall be made in Jerusalem on Mount Zion, and all the luminaries be renewed for healing and for peace and for blessing for the elect of Israel, that thus it may be from that day and until all the days of the earth." So this is fascinating because we're just getting a quick glimpse of the beginning of Jubilees chapter 1 says that these angels were going to give to Moses the division of days, all the things that were going to happen through the law and the testimony, and they were going to give him this information, what was going to go down. That's why at the end of this chapter, at verse 28, it's talking about this angel took these tablets and was going to give them to Moses. He's actually going to start speaking them to Moses and explaining where all these laws came from. That's what chapters 2 through 50 are all about, right? Is that he tells them, now, here's where all these laws that you got, here's creation, chapter 2, you go into all the story of Adam and Eve, chapter 3 and 4, and you get all the history of the patriarchs leading up to the moment of Mount Sinai at the end of chapter 50. So this is this moment where the angel is actually expressing to Moses the back history of the patriarchs from Adam all the way forward to the moment of Mount Sinai, giving explanation of where these laws even came from, where these feast days came from. And it's the angel, as Galatians 3 and Hebrews 2 tell us, that's telling him these things. It's mediating and communicating these things to Moses on Mount Sinai. And I'm going to read something fascinating for you real quick, because not only did he just mention the sanctuary again, that's going to be built on Mount Zion, that's a future prophetic reference for the day of the Lord and the coming New Jerusalem. But if we go to chapter 2 and we read in the very beginning of chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "And the angel of the presence spoke to Moses according to the word of the Lord, saying, Write the complete history of the creation, how in 6 days the Lord God finished all his works and all that he created, and kept Sabbath on the 7th day and hallowed it for all ages, and appointed it as a sign for all his works." So right here, in the very, very beginning of chapter 2, it says the angel spoke to Moses. And from here forward, the angel keeps speaking to Moses. Right. Okay. So if we skip over real quick, we're going to go to chapter 50. It's at it's in chapter 48, I believe, towards the end here. And this is going to be in, if you're following along, this will be in chapter 48, verses 7 through 12. Okay, but it's going to be 7 through 13. All right. And it says, "And everything took place according to your words. 10 great and terrible judgments came on the land of Egypt, that you might execute vengeance on it for Israel. And the Lord did everything for Israel's sake, and according to his covenant, which he had ordained with Abraham, that he would take vengeance on them, as they had brought them by force into bondage. And Prince Mastema stood up against you, and sought to cast you into the hands of Pharaoh. And he helped the Egyptian sorcerers, and they stood by and wrought before you the evils. Indeed, we permitted them to work, but the remedies we did not allow them to be wrought by their hands. And the Lord smote them with the malignant ulcers, that they were not able to stand. For we destroyed them, so that they cannot perform a single sign. And notwithstanding all these signs and wonders, Prince Mastema was not put to shame, because he took courage and cried to the Egyptians to pursue after you with all the powers of the Egyptians, with their chariots and with their horses, and with all the hosts of the people of Egypt. And I stood between the Egyptians and Israel, and we delivered Israel out of his hand and out of the hand of the people, and the Lord brought them through the midst of the sea as if it were dry land. Guys, it's crazy. In case you didn't catch that, verse 13, the guy speaking to Moses says, and I stood between you and the Egyptians.
Yeah.
Right? What did we read in Exodus 14? Verse 20, the angel of God went from in front of them and stood behind them, between them and the Egyptians. Okay, guys, I try to summarize and contain my excitement. The entire book of the Jubilees is this angel speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai. The angel they saw go before them, the angel that's referenced in Exodus 23, this angel that we see leading them out of Egypt and doing stuff for them in the agency of the Father, literally speaks for 48 chapters and tells Moses the back history of from Adam up to Mount Sinai. Is it any wonder that this book they try to ignore this book from scholars and in history, and Judaism ignores this book, won't even touch it? Is it any wonder, right? Not only is it a proponent of actually the scriptural based instructions of the Father's commandments, right, which Judaism doesn't like already anyway, because they add their own to it and make it even more complicated. But it also has prophecies of his coming kingdom. It has prophecies of Jesus inside the book of Jubilees. It has prophecies of what was going to befall not just in the days of Abraham and Moses and Jacob, but also what's happening in our modern day right now in Exodus 20 and Jubilees chapter 23, as we awake to the commandments of the Father and remember how relevant they are and that it's a part of our walk, right? So, of course, the enemy does not want you to understand the book of Jubilees. And for all the Christians out there who have been coming up with this theory that, well, see, this angel of God, this is a pre-incarnate Yeshua.
Right.
I used to actually hold that belief just as of 2.5 years ago. I thought, because I hadn't fully caught all the relevance of this, and I didn't understand the agency yet, and I didn't, there was some other things going on there. But once I really started digging in even more and more, I realized, whoa, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of prophecies that tell us Yeshua was not even revealed once until we get up to the moment of his birth through Mary. So all these other moments that are happening here, it says an angel's there. So why am I ignoring that word and trying to impose a pre-incarnate Yeshua there, right? Why? And so now we have, from the book of Jubilees, we have from the person speaking during the book of Jubilees, which is the angel of his presence, telling us that he was the one in Exodus that was leading them out. How beautiful is that?
And delivering the law and the covenant to them on Mount Sinai. So that even bleeds into, this other doctrine on the other side of things in the, Torah crowd of this, marriage and remarriage thing, which you're going to be doing another short video on soon. But this is another fact that kind of is a wrench in the spokes of that whole entire concept, because if it's, there's this, the weird, it was a pre-incarnate Yeshua back then making that covenant, that's why he can come and die and remarry us.
Yeah,
It's for another video, which is in the works.
Not only do the scriptures themselves debunk that idea, but the whole book of Jubilees debunks that idea. So, and I'll be breaking that down in great detail in another Morning Cup of Context in the following week. So, just be looking for that. All right. What else do we want to? What was left in our parents' sweetie?
I think we had 2 Baruch, and that's it.
Yeah, 2nd Baruch. All right, guys. So now we're going to be in the Apocalypse of Baruch. It's also called 2nd Baruch. We're going to be in chapter 4, and we're reading verses 2 through 6. And it says, "Do you think that this is the city of which I have said, on the palm of my hands I have engraven you? This building now built in your midst is not that which is revealed with me, that which prepared beforehand here from the time when I took counsel to make paradise, and showed Adam before he sinned. But when he transgressed the commandment, it was removed from him, as also paradise. And after these things I showed it to my servant Abraham by night among the portions of the victims. And again also I showed it to Moses on Mount Sinai when I showed to the likeness of the tabernacle and all its vessels. And now behold, it is preserved with me as paradise. All right, guys. So the reason I mention this is because here in 2nd Baruch, the context of this passage here is Baruch was in the days of Jeremiah. He was also a prophet and a scribe. And he is concerned about the invading armies that are going to come in. Nebuchadnezzar and his crew is going to come in, and they're going to invade Judah, destroy the temple, or Jerusalem itself and the temple. And so he's having a conversation with God through an angel saying, look, what's going to happen if you let this temple just be destroyed? Who's going to learn your righteous law? How will justice be done on the earth if no one is going to know your law and the enemy wins? Because the enemy wasn't always just trying to destroy the people. They were trying to destroy the message the people carried, which was the law of God, which is the behavior of God, which leads to the kingdom of God, right? And so this whole concept is Baruch is questioning, hey, how could you let this happen? And the Father replies through the angel to him, don't worry, this building that you see here, this isn't the one. Yeah. This isn't the eternal sanctuary that I showed Abraham and Moses. Right? Yeah. So therefore we go back to Exodus 15, and now we understand how Moses, since it was already revealed to Abraham and also to Jacob, just wasn't mentioned in this particular passage, that Moses could even have the knowledge to speak about the future heavenly sanctuary that we're all going to be taken to. So here we also have a promise by the Father saying this sanctuary was in the garden that Adam was in paradise, and when it's not the sanctuary that he's talking about is in paradise with him. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul says it's in the third firmament layer. But the one on the ground that was about to be burned by the Babylonians during the days of Baruch and Jeremiah, this is where the Yahweh is telling them, no, don't worry about this building here. This one is just the copy and shadow that was built on the ground. This isn't the one that I'm going to bring down with my Messiah. And it's called paradise, right? Right. So this is what's exciting. And I just want to make sure people understand this distinction. Again, to reiterate, going forward from Abraham all the way, from Adam, as we saw right here in this passage, from Adam all the way up to Moses, they already knew the gospel of the kingdom of God, and this is what motivated them in faith and action to go out and do these things. They knew there was the Garden of Eden was going to be returned. They just didn't know it was going to be called the New Jerusalem at that point, but they knew that it was going to come back down through the firmament at some point, because in it was the sanctuary that the Father had initially set up on the earth, the true heavenly tabernacle that they were making a copy of on the ground. So
yeah. And one thing I forgot, we skipped over kind of with the Jubilees pairing, and I thought we were going to read that part, but I guess we didn't, is the class of angel. It's referred to as the angel of the presence.
Yeah, that was in chapter 2.
Okay.
Yeah, the very first verse of chapter 2.
Okay, so it's just interesting to me because that would be a very fitting term for this angel of the Lord, or more than one if there is, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But at least this one angel of the Lord we see constantly throughout the Old Testament. It's a fitting title for them to be the angel of the presence of the Lord.
That's right.
So, when people say, well, how can anyone put their, be face to face with the Lord if they can't be in his presence, but Moses spoke with him face to face? Well, it's through these angels of his presence.
That's right.
So,
as he uses agency to use his angels. Yeah. That's the whole point. Yeah. And so that's where, that's all this stuff is explained to us, guys. Yeah. It's in the book. We just have to discipline ourselves to continue to read it and study it out for comprehension, not just always for memorization of a single passage or a single sentence, but to read entire chapters and to look for comprehension of the concept of the book. Just as you would in school when you're 14 years old and the teacher said, pick a book out from the library and you're going to do a book report on it in a week. Okay? More than likely, it's a 14-year-old level book, and the teacher can know quickly from her reading it real quick whether or not you understand the book through your book report. Right. Okay? So this is the concept here, is that, look, we've got a book in front of us that has nothing but wisdom inside of it, right? Pure instruction from the Father plus history, so we can understand where this stuff came from. And if we're only reading it line by line and jumping around all over the place, we'll never gain comprehension of the story itself, the big story. And the big story is the Father created mankind to dwell with him in his house. That was a special place inside the creation. Adam and Eve messed up, got kicked out of that house. That house was on the ground until the flood, and then after the flood it was retracted, but it's going to come back down with the Messiah who made the reunification of us and that piece of land to be possible through his priesthood. And he, yes, sacrificed himself on the cross to attain that priesthood, so that at the end of the story we can get back to the Father's house and dwell with him in peace and security, right? So it brings everything back to good. That's the whole point. And so, I mean, that's, sorry for the bumper sticker explanation of the Bible, but that's basically, in short, that's the Bible in a nutshell, right? And all the details in between is what gives us encouragement, hope, and life, because we await that day when he returns and we're given our incorruptible glorified bodies at the resurrection so that we can commune with him in his house.
Hallelujah.
That's it's the hope that we wait for, right?
Yeah.
The blessed hope.
Yeah.
That we're so excited to share with other people. What other religion on earth has that claim?
None.
That you would have immortality with the Creator himself and be able to live in his house?
None.
No other religion
I studied them all. None of them do.
That's right. This is the gospel of the kingdom of God. So we encourage you guys, keep reading your Bibles this week. You're welcome to read beyond what we've shared with these portions today.
Please do.
But even if you just review these portions and these scriptures throughout the week, it's still going to bless you. Any concluding words, sweetie?
Same as always. I know how hard it can be to watch a long video, and so if you made it all the way to the end, just thanks for watching. We appreciate you. Drop your thoughts, put your heart in the comments, let us know what you think about this study and what stood out to you, and maybe what other scriptures that came to mind for you while we were reading that we didn't pair. And I just want you to know we really appreciate you guys, and that our heart here is just to help you all understand the word to an extent where you can actually teach it to others, answer objections, effectively preach the gospel of the kingdom, and maybe win some hearts and minds in the process, but also always have an answer, if anyone's questioning the faith that is inside of you. So that's our goal here. Context creates comprehension, and the more you keep things in context, the better you're going to comprehend this book. And the better you comprehend the book, the better you're able to expound on it to others and help them to comprehend it. And that is the goal, and that is what Jesus sent his disciples out to do, was to preach the gospel of the kingdom to all creatures.
That's right.
And make disciples, which means teach people how to teach other people how to understand this.
That's right. And inherently in the gospel kingdom of God is belief that Yeshua is Lord.
Right.
That's all, because he has to be your high priest.
Yeah.
To get you into the gospel,
Yes.
to get you into the kingdom of God, right? So 100% give your heart and your mind and your thoughts and your strength to discipleship and belief in Yeshua, who is the agent, perfect representation of the Father, right? He is the one we worship as our God, our King, our Lord, Savior, and Redeemer. And if you've never taken that moment to actually ask him to affect your life through the Spirit of God, please do that.
Yeah.
That way, the gospel of the kingdom of God will make perfect sense to you, because now you have a high priest who is the one who sacrificed himself to get you into that kingdom.
Yeah.
So, all right, guys, we appreciate you. We thank you for joining us here. We wish you a great Shabbat, and we hope to see you back here next week on Kingdom Portions.
See you guys.